Welcome to our Survive and Thrive webinar series. I am Rachel Perkins, the Education and Outreach Specialist for Texas Oncology Foundation. We're glad to have you all with us today, and we're excited to hear from Ashley Griffin, who's discussing financial resilience in the face of cancer. Let me give you a little bit of background about the foundation. The Texas Oncology Foundation is dedicated to providing support to cancer patients in the communities where they live, work, and receive treatment. Through Survive and Thrive programming, the foundation can provide educational events and resources to help build the community connections and support all involved in the cancer journey. So if you hopped on, you probably know the webinar is being recorded and the online archive will be available for viewing after the live version. The recording will be sent to everyone in the follow-up email, and there's also like a little extra in there too. Ashley gave us some great resources to add in there, so there'll be a little bit extra this time. And it'll be available on our Texas Oncology Foundation website. And I'm actually going to share that with you guys now because we did get a new website. So let me share my screen really quickly. This is what our new website looks like. If you type in texasoncologyfoundation.org, you're going to go to the Education tab and click on Survive and Thrive webinar. From here, you can see all the upcoming webinars, and you can also see the resource archive here. So there are upcoming webinars, but also you'll be able to access any of our webinars from the past with legal and financial, cancer treatment, caregivers, nutrition, and wellness. All of them are going to be on the bottom right here. With that, I'm going to go ahead and start and introduce our speaker. We have Ashley Griffin here. She's a licensed master social worker. She currently supports Texas oncology patients in the Houston area. And as a social worker, Ashley provides emotional support to patients and their families while also serving as a bridge to resources. So Ashley, do you want to go ahead and share your screen with us?
Okay. Well, hello, everyone from all the many places that you're joining us today. As Rachel mentioned, my name is Ashley Griffin. I'm a social worker here in Texas, in the Houston area. And so today we're going to be talking about financial resilience in the face of cancer. And so this topic does focus on financial toxicity, however, probably from a different perspective, as many of us have probably heard about the topic. And so as a social worker, when I am working with patients and their families, a lot of times I'm kind of coming in when the burden of the financial toxicity has kind of reached a point where now they're in distress. And so I see some of those psychosocial burdens that come along. And so today we're going to talk about that from that framework. And so most importantly, this topic can be heavy because cancer is heavy, right? For some people, the process, their experience is traumatic. Even the experience of financial toxicity can be traumatic. And so take care of yourself and take the time if you need. If you need to kind of take a moment, if it brings up things for you, I think it's important to listen to that and take whatever time you need. And so starting on the same page, as I mentioned, there have been many presentations, many webinars, lots of research around this idea of financial toxicity. It's not a new phenomenon. However, now there's a name to it. And practitioners are starting to realize that actually financial burden, financial distress that's associated with health treatment is actually also a side effect of that treatment. Today, specifically, we're going to be talking about financial distress as a result of cancer. And so financial toxicity, it's a financial distress because of the disease or treatment. In other words, we all might experience sometimes financial hardship, financial strain. However, financial toxicity as it relates to cancer is saying that the cancer treatment, the diagnosis has induced this increased feeling of distress related to the financial burdens. And then again, framing financial toxicity as the same as other toxic side effects, such as nausea, neutropenia, hair loss. So these are things that cancer patients and their families, might experience and see. However, financial burden, financial distress is actually can be viewed as the same, having the same impacts on treatment outcomes. And again, when compared to other chronic conditions, cancer patients, they experience more often loss of work and also difficulty returning to work. And so let's talk about financial toxicity as a side effect of cancer. So the financial worry can impact compliance and health quality of life. And so when we're talking about health related quality of life, this also includes psychological functioning. This is social, mental, psychological well-being. And so again, as I mentioned, perhaps um, other webinars or discussions about financial toxicity, they focus on access to insurance. They look at disability and how you can reduce financial toxicity because of the burden. And so, however, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But again, when we're looking at some of this impact on psychological functioning, because this impacts your overall well-being. And so the other piece is the unknown. So we know that there are medical costs that come with when you're receiving treatment. However, there's also these unknown costs that is very difficult for patients and their family to prepare for, especially when the conversation isn't had in the beginning. And so this financial burden of cancer treatment might have some hidden costs, such as parking, transportation, childcare, care management, nutritional supplements, post-surgery supplies. So these are things that if you were kind of framing your mind around, okay, how much is this going to cost? A lot of times we're looking at that medical bill. However, some of these costs add up. For example, one of the clinics that I support in the medical center, it actually moved to a different facility. However, the parking is not managed by our clinic. It's not managed by Texas Oncology. So then there's really no way that we can support patients in terms of parking costs. And so it's $12.99 every time a patient enters into that parking lot. And so when we think about radiation treatment or chemotherapy, treatments that are happening daily, weekly, several times a month, $12.99 adds up. And that's taking it from somewhere else, bills, car notes, places where the money is really needed. And so this is just one example. And so let's look at a closer look. When I think about the cost of treatment, in my mind, I really think of the game Monopoly, where you have to sometimes pay a rent to go forward, or you have to pay some kind of tax in order to move along. Well, this is in my mind how I really frame the financial toxicity of cancer. And so it kind of starts with this distress formula, which automatically catapults patients into their families into survival mode. And this might be again, familiar for some of you that are on the call today. And so it starts with this notice of a problem. Maybe it's a lump here, or maybe it's something else. Your stomach hurts, headaches. It's this thing that feels like a small problem, but it's a little concerning. So then you go to the doctor to figure it out, to see if there's something that you can do to fix this problem. Well, then after going to the doctor, then this concern is for something serious. And they're saying it looks like it might be cancer. And so then that leads quickly into scans, biopsy, blood work, and then it comes back, okay, this is cancer. And then automatically it goes into treatment plans and treatment options. And then in the mind, right, our natural humanistic kind of thing is to survive. When we're faced with challenges, when we're faced with difficulties, our immediate go-to is how do we survive? And so when you're looking at cancer, it's okay, well, then that's treatment. And so then you just go. And then there's this fight to live. But when you look at this process that I've presented here, at what point do patients and their families get an opportunity to process, an opportunity to plan and to think about, okay, what does this mean for us as a family? You know that it's going to be a huge financial cost. However, there's really no opportunity to do that. And so then again, this leads families into survival mode, and they're just going, which again leads to distress, again, a lot like trauma. And so, as I mentioned, we're talking about financial toxicity from a psychosocial framework. And so, when we're taking this psychosocial approach to financial toxicity, I think it's important to mention Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't know if many of you are familiar with this, but the basic concept is that our basic needs have to be met first. Those basic needs are what we see on the bottom. That's breathing, that's food, that's water, sex, sleep, stability. So then you move up into the pyramid. And so there goes to things like safety, love, belonging, a sense of self identity, right? And so, in order to you to even get to self actualization, those basic bottom needs have to be met. But when we think about what cancer does in terms of the financial distress, is that it makes people have to sacrifice some of those basic needs, but for the goal of survival, because you've automatically been placed in this survival mode, which causes that internal distress to fight and to meet those basic needs. And so when we keep this in mind, as we talk about some of the cost of treatment from this financial toxicity, then we can think about how this can cause distress for patients and their families. And so the number one immediate cost of cancer treatment is time. And for some patients and their families, time equals dollars. So missed hours at work means less money coming in. And if there's less money coming in, then there's less financial resources to place on the things that need to be paid for, the things that matter. Again, looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those basic needs that need to be met: food, water, shelter. When now money's being trickled somewhere else and there's not a lot of money coming in, there's car notes, there's mortgage, there's rent, food, it's more expensive. Even when we're thinking about just in general, our cost of living is increasing. And so, what does this do when all of a sudden there's a decrease in income, a decrease in financial resources? And so, again, when we look at cancer, it's money constantly coming out, but the experience is that there's less money going in. So then people are once again faced with another pay to go decision. Do you continue treatment or do you go back to work? Now, this is it's actually one, when I think about my support for patients, this is one of the hardest conversations that I have with patients, their families, because that's their natural instinct, is to live and to survive. But that also includes providing for your family. And then when you're no longer able to provide for your family's basic needs adequately, something has to give, right? And so again, there's this decision. Do we pay to go forward in treatment because you're telling me that this means that I'm going to get better, that I'm going to live longer? Or do I go back to work because I see the bills now? I see my rent payment now. I see that my kids need food now. And so this is, again, that recipe of distress that patients and their families starts to build up, and it starts to become overwhelming. And then we see some of those impacts to the psychological and those psychosocial functioning. So this is a term that, again, as I mentioned, I've kind of framed financial toxicity in this game of life, of monopoly. And so I've kind of came up with this term of the cancer tax, and it might exist somewhere else, I'm not sure. But for the purposes of our discussion, this is what I mean by the cancer tax, is that there are these four major areas. There's the emotional impact of financial toxicity, financial distress. There's the impact on mental and psychological well-being, our support systems, our ability to ask and receive help, and then, of course, that financial burden. And so when we think about a person, they're being taxed in all these areas of their life and all these areas of their well-being, and it's all kind of surrounded by this need for treatment, this even survivorship, these things that are required in order for me to continue to live, for my loved one to continue to live, or to be rid of, right? To be rid of this cancer. And so, as I mentioned here, all the areas of well being, they collide at this point in time, and they are exasperated by financial burden of having cancer or having a loved one with cancer. And so let's look at some of these taxes or these tolls on patients and their families. So when we think about the financial tax, so automatically, right, there's this decreased time working, which means that there's a decrease in income. For some, there's job loss. There's loss of income to an ability to return back to work. And another challenge, especially that I come across often, is survivorship. Survivorship is difficult because you finish all of this treatment plan and then you're told, okay, go back to work. You're free to do whatever you did before. Your life is good. You're cancer free. However, that's not always true because the ability might have changed. I have patients that they still have, the remnants of neuropathy, or that the things that they used to do was labor intensive, and now their body just doesn't let them do that anymore. Other people, they have issues with their memory. There's so many impacts, these kind of residual effects of cancer that are kind of left and leave people shattered of how can I go back to work? How can I get back to the way that I was before? And so this is, again, it is another portion of that financial tax. Loss of insurance. Again, not working can lead to losing insurance or the ability to pay for premiums. And then this too is worrisome because you know that you need the treatment. The doctors are telling you need the treatment, but now you can't afford the treatment. And so life changes, and this treatment is, and the loss of insurance is a huge one for patients and their families. The cost of medication. I get calls about prescription costs often, and I'll mention a little bit later. But one thing is when I look at GoodRx, I lead patients there a lot. Getting a medication at Walgreens might cost $200, but getting it at Costco is $30. But if patients and their families that they don't know that this is the case, then they're paying $200 for a prescription that they need every 30 days. So every 30 days, and then they're told they have to take this for 10 years, 5 years, the rest of their life. That financial burden adds up. And so these are these things that aren't necessarily anticipated, when you're thinking about starting treatment or even survivorship. But however, it's a cost that patients and their families are incurring. And then also those non-medical costs, as I mentioned before. So transportation, parking, childcare, housing bills, food, all these things that still require your attention. They still require your financial resources. But again, you have less coming in, but more is going out, more money going to just the desire to survive, the desire to get better. Transportation is huge. Again, at one of my clinics, we have a lot of patients that come from some rural areas to get treatment because it's the only place that they can get radiation. Well, if a one-way trip is 50 miles or 100 miles, think about the cost burden of the car, of gas. Some patients can't physically drive themselves anymore. And so do you have the support, the resources around you to be able to get to that appointment? This is one of my hardest ones, and I feel so bad a lot of times because I can't get a lift from 100 miles away to be able to bring a patient to get their treatment for every day for 6 weeks. And so this is a cost that is challenging, but again, it causes patients and their families to again make the decision. Do we pay to go forward? Do we go forward and just see what happens, knowing that it's taking from somewhere else? The refrigerator might be empty, but we have to get to, for example, Houston for treatment. Another point here, which I'll talk about a little bit later when we're talking about our support system, is childcare. I like to share stories because these are the real experiences that patients are having. I have a mother, she has stage 4 lung cancer, and she's no longer able to go to work, and she's also having difficulty even just doing the basic things around the house. Well, her husband, he works shift work in the plant, and he's always done that, and he's been, the breadwinner for their family. However, they have a 6-year-old girl who's now starting school. And when I am listening to this father talk about all the things that he has to do, because he still has to go to work, that is a non-negotiable, right? If he doesn't go to work, they don't have their home, they don't eat. And his wife also needs to get to her treatment. And so he's stuck, right? How does he go to work, still support his wife's care? But then we have this 6-year-old little girl who has to go to school. She has to go to school. She can't walk to the bus stop on her own. And her mother also can't do that right now for her. So then what do they do within this family? And so this is really an illustration of the financial burden, the financial distress that families and patients come to experience, as they're going through treatment. So here, as I mentioned, that support system tax, and this also comes with some shame and fear on the behalf of patients, because for some, they've always taken care of everything that they've needed on their own. If they needed a bill paid, they went to work. If something needed to be done, they did it. They've been able to go through life without having to ask for help, especially financial help. And so there's this shame hump that sometimes patients and families have to get over, of how do we tap into the people around us? How do we ask for help? How do we ask our community for help because we need it? There's some patients that they don't want to do any kind of a fundraiser, a GoFundMe, because of, you've always just done it on your own. And so the other side of that is the fear of burdening family. As I mentioned, this particular wife, the thing that worries her the most is the burden that she's putting on her husband, to have to take care of her, to have to take care of her daughter, also still to have to go to work. And so, as you can imagine, again, it leads to that decision. Do I continue or do I go forward? Do I stop here, or what do I do to get better? But for some who are kind of in the more aggressive stage of their cancer, this really isn't an option, right? It's your body's doing one thing, though your mind and your heart want to do another. And then also, I think it's important to mention the same things that I'm mentioning here is also can be applied to caregivers, their time, their work, their wage loss, job loss. And so there are also this financial tax, this financial distress of treatment costs that impacts the entire family unit. And then also the psychological tax. When we're kind of putting all of these things together, cancer has this underlying attachment, and it creates almost this mental dichotomy of life and death, right? That the decisions I'm making, that it impacts, do I want to live? Or if I don't do this, they're saying that I might die. And so there's this worry of dying. Nobody wants to die. No one wants to leave their family. No caregiver wants their family member to leave them. And so it becomes, as I mentioned, this catapult into survival mode, and these constant decisions of having to weigh, okay, the rent is due, but I also have this copay. And that is a horrible decision to have to make. Yet this is what our families and our cancer patients are making daily. And so then there's the mental trouble, because you're paying to try to live longer. And this in itself is an emotional burden. It's distressful. It causes all of those things that we see in terms of depression, anxiety, and some of those negative adverse feelings. And so when you start to look at financial toxicity in this frame, this psychosocial frame, we can very much see and realize how it for sure is a side effect of cancer. But it's a side effect that isn't often talked about when you're going through that list of that drug that you're going to take that chemo, and they say all the things that can happen. The part that's missing is this part, the psychological, the psychosocial impacts that come from this financial distress, this burden that comes with cancer treatment. In a study examining financial worry, people worried more about the cost of treatment and the burden of their family than dying. And even when we think about that, that just shows again the intense feelings that patients are feeling while they're going through treatment. This guilt of that, I know that I need to do this. I know that I have to do this. My family, they want me to do this, but I'm causing burden. I'm causing hardship on our family just so that I can get better. And so, as I mentioned, there's another decision. Do I continue treatment or not? Is the impact too much on others? And so when patients and families are constantly in this pool, this struggle, do I pay? Do I go forward? Do I stop? And maybe I can get back to work. I can maybe get my job back. This is difficult. And again, it feeds into that distress that patients and their families are feeling. Then let's look at the emotional tax, the financial worry. So when we put all of these things together, there are life changes, role changes, there's feelings of being useless, senses of hopelessness. And these are some of those common depression related symptoms. Life transition, role changes, going from being the provider of the family, the breadwinner, to now I require everyone to do everything for me. Small things that I did easily, going to the kitchen, fixing a sandwich, getting water, holding my cup of water. These changes in life, these are distressful. And they again, as I mentioned, they can cause depression and they can cause things that impact treatment outcomes. Treatment outcomes of compliance. I don't want to take the medication. The medication costs too much. Going to treatment 5 times a day, 5 times a week, I cannot do. It's too much of a financial burden. I will come when I can. And I have patients where sometimes they say that I can't do treatment this month. I've missed too many hours of work. And sometimes for providers, this is hard, right? Because they know you need the treatment and you need to get better. But patients are feeling at home the financial toll of me continuing down this path. And also, cancer and cancer treatment's unpredictable. You go through one full course of treatment and then you do a scan and it turns out you need more. Or just all these different things, right? Afterwards, you do survivorship, and then it turns out you still have to continue taking this medication. And so these life changes cause challenges and can be distressful for patients and their families. And then also the loss of purpose and identity. And if we look back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this is an important need that people have. That if my identity was my work, then who am I now that I can't do it? If my identity as a mother was that I cared for my children and I walked her to the bus stop every day, but now I can't do it, well, then what does that mean for a patient's identity? So then when we think about when sometimes I'll get referrals that say the person is, this individual was very depressed and they're having a difficult time with treatment. So sometimes providers say, why? Treatment's going well. They're not having any nausea, like it looks like there's changes. But when patients are saying that treatment isn't going well, they're talking about these things. I feel bad. I'm doing this because I'm supposed to get better, but it makes me feel worse. And it's the same when we think about those other adverse effects, right? Nausea, neuropathy. Um, you're doing the treatment because you want to get better, but then it makes you feel worse. Again, it's that dichotomy in the brain. It's confusing that I'm doing one thing, but it's really hurting. And so how do patients navigate that? And that requires patient and family to reconcile. And that reconciliation sometimes comes in decision to move forward or to take a pause or I'm done with this completely. And so then we see some of those compliance issues. So then the financial burden has been found to decrease satisfaction with care. This is exactly to the point that I'm mentioning. Patients don't feel good going through treatment because they're experiencing so many other things at home, within their mind, within their relationships, challenges with their spouse. All of these things are what they're experiencing. However, and so they have to weigh, okay, the cause of this is this treatment. So in thinking about challenges in life beyond cancer treatment, this is a big one because when I get referrals for depression, a lot of times it's during survivorship. It's because when we think about that formula of distress that I showed earlier, this kind of just constant go, 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 because you get this diagnosis, life turns upside down, your time is no longer your own, your life is no longer your own, and you're just kind of dictated by this schedule of treatment and medication and financial costs, and it consumes you. And so you never stop to process and say, okay, this is hard on me. Actually, I'm feeling a little down. This is tough. I'm having a difficult time even with my family and my support system. I feel alone though I'm surrounded by many. Those kind of psychosocial impacts, a lot of times patients and their families don't even get the space to feel or to talk about until after treatment's done. It's kind of like when the appointments stop and then your mind is like, okay, why do I feel bad? Why do I feel horrible? Why do I feel angry? Why do I feel all of the feelings that I didn't get to feel when I was going through treatment? And this is that survivor anxiety. There's a lot of work around just the challenges of survivorship. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes treatment is done, and then patients and their families are they ring that bell and they're given that golden star that says you did it, you survived. However, patients and families are kind of broken in pieces. And so the idea about building resiliency, this comes because for sure life feels like it's in pieces, and you might have felt lower than you've ever felt before. But how do you start to put it back together? And the key is that it might not fit, or it might not look the way that it did before you started treatment. So this requires a bit of a mind shift, but this is that resiliency piece, because there are challenges that come, right? After everything's done, some can go back to work, some cannot. The possible debt, loss of things. People have given up their house, downsized, traded in their car, anything to try to reduce the financial burden. Well, then when treatment's done, you're still lost without those things. Again, challenges for loved ones. For some family, the person that they've been with, fighting along, sacrificing with, enduring all of these difficult hardships, that they might not be with them anymore. And so life may be different. So, how do you also balance grieving the loss of a loved one while also dealing with the debt, the financial impact that your family experienced while going through this very hard process? And so starting with resiliency is taking a moment, pausing, and thinking about all the things that you just went through. And I say that, and it sounds so simple, but when you really pause and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. Things that you never imagined in your life that you would experience, but you did. You did that. That is human capital. That is your resource. That is the things that you put back inside your internal piggy bank. The sense of confidence, the sense of strength. That's how you build the resiliency back, because you went through something that many people can't imagine or have experienced. And there's also no playbook for navigating cancer. One is because all of our experiences are different. Our house is different. Our support system is different. The people around us are different. Our work is different. Our childhood experiences, all these things that impact how we experience this life event, that all of that makes that different. So no cancer journey, no cancer experience is the same. No experience with financial toxicity is the same. But when you think about that, you did that, and give yourself and be proud that I did that, because that is surviving every single day. Every single day that you made that sacrifice, that decision to move forward, that is surviving. Every time that your loved one took off of work to make sure that we don't know how we're going to do 6 weeks of radiation, but somehow now we're 4 weeks past that, that's surviving. And that's how you start to build the capacity to be resilient. And then the other piece is figuring out what helps, figuring out the resources. One thing is that when we're looking at the literature and resources and also the experiences of patients, many have said that they express if they had been more prepared, that would have helped them. Then what does preparation look like? Knowing upfront the cost of planned treatment. Yes, for sure. That's those out-of-pocket costs that are medically related. The how much is this chemo going to cost me? How much is this therapy pill that you're saying that I need? How much is this going to cost me? But also looking at what is the parking here? What is the food? What do all these things look like here? Because that's how you can better plan, because you have the anticipation. And then also sometimes thinking of, okay, what happens if I can't go back to work? What do we do? So making those preparations. And the biggest thing is tapping into the resources, which is hard, as I mentioned. Financial screening. So here at Texas Oncology, we use the NCCN distress screening. If there are any patients here that attend any of our clinics, you might have noticed the little thermometer when you go into your appointments, and aside of that thermometer, it says all this list of all these problems. But we're screening for distress. That's what that thermometer means. But from the standpoint of treatment, are there things that are happening in your life that are impacting your ability to effectively access treatment? And it's impacting your treatment outcomes, that you don't feel good about treatment, that you don't want to continue treatment. And so that's what that thermometer helps. It doesn't, there are some financial distress screening models that specifically look at financial distress. However, this is captured there. But again, it gives us an opportunity to be able to assess to see what are patients experiencing. And if you're a practitioner and your organization doesn't use a distress screening or doesn't use a financial distress screening, this is a best practice. It helps capture the things that they're experiencing outside of that treatment area, outside of that appointment planning. Again, what patients said, if I had known what this would look like, then I could have planned more. We could have budgeted better. We could have done other things. This planning, as I'll talk about a little bit later, about talking to your employers, talking to your benefit representatives about what does long-term disability look like? What does short-term disability look like? How, if I had a plan that, okay, I have, these many hours of PTO, and then I have FMLA, short-term disability, long-term disability. How can I plan? And it's almost, it really is like a game of chess and movement of trying to preserve time where you can, preserve financial resources where you can, and saying, okay, we're going to tap into that when we get to this point. And when you're able to plan for those things, the blow of the financial burden of cancer and treatment, it lessens a bit. Not saying that it goes away, but it definitely lessens a bit. And then guidance on resources. This world of cancer treatment, this world of cancer resources, even as a social worker, I don't even think that I've begun to even tap like the bottom of the resources that are available. But there sometimes can be hard to find. Even for me, I can get lost in a whole rabbit hole of finding resources for one thing. But that's also a part of my role here, and that to collaborate with patients to do that. I have some patients that are just like resource warriors, where they spend time, it's like a full-time job, searching for resources, Googling, talking to people, talking to other organizations. Oh, you did that. Okay, I can get connected here. There's always asked questions. If they don't have a resource for you, then where can you go? This takes a collaborative effort, but it's definitely, there are resources out there, and there are resources for diagnosis specific things that are there, but sometimes it can be some work to find them and identify them, but they are there. So things that you can do. The first thing that I tell patients is, especially if they have insurance, interview your insurance company. Sometimes when we're choosing insurance, we're choosing our insurance based on how we're feeling today. And that's the same with even Medicare plans, all of those things that I feel today. I can drive today, so I don't need that transportation benefit. So sometimes we have to think more future. Okay, that might be good if in an event, I have a patient, he can drive, but he can't get into his truck. because of his metastatic pain. So he can't get in the truck, so he can't drive. So therefore, now he has a transportation barrier. And so these are kind of those things where that come up, but we can't necessarily plan for all things. But as much as you can, think future. Think, not for a lack of better words, worst case scenario. I feel great today, but what does it look like if I need help in the house? If I can't quite get into the shower on my own and I might need a little bit of assistance, what does my insurance do to help and to cover this? Insurance, they have sometimes some hidden benefits. Some have food allowances, some have transportation allowances. And so interview them, see what are the things that are available. And if you are already have a diagnosis or have a loved one who has one, say, this is where we're at. This is what treatment looks like. We live this far from the clinic. This care is necessary. What kind of resources do we have available? You pay for that. You pay a premium for that. Make them work. Make them figure out the best way that this insurance can support and help you. Interview your benefits office at your workplace. If you have short-term, long-term disability, whatever it is, FMLA, time off, if there's creative scheduling opportunities, that's also for your supervisor, for your management, leadership. Ask them these questions. And sometimes it's hard, right? Because you're already dealing with this heavy thing, this heavy life change, and all of the worries that come with it. But if you can't do it, designate someone. If it's your spouse or if it's a child, if it's a best friend, someone who can go and ask those questions for you, that's okay too. You don't have to carry the load on your own, but designate people who can help in that area. If you know you have a good best friend that's good at, grilling people and getting the information, then that's her task, that's his task, and you do that. And so speak to the financial counselor at all the places that you get care. So again, I'm in a community clinic, or our organization is community based, right? So we have our own standalone clinics. We're not really connected to hospitals for the most part. So some of our patients might get something done at a hospital, but then they might get their standard treatment done at the clinic. Well, I can't necessarily help with the hospital bill, but they have a financial counselor who can. So you might be finding yourself talking to multiple people, but at every single place that you get some kind of care, talk and ask the questions for financial support and counseling, because these organizations also too, they have the ability and the options, whether it looks like a payment plan, if some organizations give hardship discounts. And so these are the questions to ask. And again, these financial counselors or financial advisors that are within these organizations, that's what they're there for, because research shows that the impact of this treatment, the impact of this diagnosis has a financial burden. And it's best practice to be able to provide those services. Copay assistance disease funds, this kind of ties back to those available resources that are out there. So it's looking at copay assistance for multiple myeloma, and they're there. And you might click on it and it might be closed, but get notified. I do that for a lot of those kind of those disease funds that I have to come across often. They'll send me an email and say it's now open. Well, when I see that that now open, I'm applying quickly for patients, or I'm telling them, hey, this is open. Let's apply right now. But get notified when things open up, and then it really leads to a trail that you go to one place and maybe they don't have funding, but a lot of times they have resources, they have connections for, we'll try this place. And so you're kind of building this web of network of support and resources that are available to you for this very reason. Manufacturer assistance programs. A lot of these drug and pharmaceutical companies, they have assistance programs, whether it's for commercial insurance or whether it's for Medicare. Ask the pharmacy, can you check to see if there is an available patient assistance fund? A lot of these funds, because if you think about it, they want you on their drug. They want people to be using these things. And so they reduce the barriers to ensure that you can be on it. And so some of these costs where it could be little to nothing that you're paying for medication that you would otherwise be paying for out of pocket or have some pretty high copays. I have started to ask these questions too. Sometimes to some of my colleagues, I'll say, can we search to see if there's any, assistance programs through the manufacturer of the drug? But now that you know too, then you can also ask also. GoodRx, as I mentioned earlier, I know it's some people, they don't try it, but it really does. It's almost mind blowing when you put in the drug there, you put in your zip code, and you just see how much the cost of this same drug varies from CVS, Costco, Kroger, like Walmart, that it just varies completely. But they'll also give you a discount card and a bin that you can use every single time that you go pick up that drug to get, at sometimes even at 80% discount. Triage Cancer, they offer free virtual financial counseling. And the website is listed here in the resources, but you can also look that up. But they offer that free financial counseling, which is great. And they're able to talk about insurance access, benefits, Medicare access also. And they also offer a drug discount card. And then Family Reach. Why recreate the wheel when we have great people already doing great work? Family Reach, they're a wonderful organization, and their whole work is about the financial impact of cancer on families and patients. And so what we'll be sending out is a copy of their book. You can find it online, you can download it. You can also they have pages from from the book also available to you. But this helps you start to plan, and they kind of give you this guidebook of questions that maybe you didn't think to ask, or to write down the cost of things that you might not have thought to ask for. But we'll be sending out a link to this financial guidebook for adults with cancer again, and it will help just to plan and budget. And then I know for many of you, this is a hard time preparing for the holidays. Take away and eliminate cancer. I have 3 kids, and the holidays this time, they want all the things, right? So it's already financially stressful, burdensome. You worry, you want to provide a wonderful experience for your family, gathering together, food. And so when you add on the financial burden of also just dealing and going through cancer, it just again exasperates everything. So preparing for the holidays, not to mention the emotional challenges that sometimes this is for families, whether it's that you lost someone, or that you start to, again, as I mentioned, there's that internal thing of wanting to live to be with your family a little bit longer, and that worry of not being with them long enough, right? That kind of time limit that sometimes cancer puts on just our life. And so the holiday season can be challenging. Financial distress from treatment and survivorship can intensify the distress symptoms. So one thing is just being aware of the things that you're feeling and experience, knowing that it might be emotionally challenging. And who do you tap into for support, to get help, to talk about it if you need to? If you know that this time of year is really hard, can you join a support group? Can you say, for me, hey, Ashley, I think I need a couple therapy sessions just until we get through January. But some other tips. How do you create new traditions? When you're thinking about the financial cost and the financial burden, maybe some of the things that you used to do was very expensive. How do you create new ones or revamp old ones? Give yourself grace, right? Like when you, again, thinking of that whole process of the things, right, that people are pulling, prodding, there's chemo, there's radiation, all the things that you're experiencing while going through treatment, or even survivorship of dealing with who am I now as I have had this history and am living with this cancer. You've done amazing work. You survive every single day. You choose to be with your family, to live, to fight, to all these things every single day. So give yourself some grace. That maybe it might not be an amazingly decorated house this year, but we're here, we're together, we can create some new traditions. Holiday drives in the community. So if the financial burden is really hard, there are a lot of organizations that love to be able to give gifts to families, especially those who have been impacted by the hardships of cancer. So being able to tap into some of those to be able to still at least give the spirit and the gift to your family if that's what you celebrate and if that's what you do. Holiday gift exchanges with cost limits, right? Saying that we're only going at five, whatever that might look like, but then still capturing the point of being together and having this time together and allow as much as possible, having it not be such a financial burden. And then all of that is be present, right? You're going through all of these things because you want to be here. Your family, they're fighting for you. They're doing, leaving work, all the sacrifice that they're doing that you just wish that they wouldn't, and it just troubles you to know that they're doing, but they're doing it because they love you and because they want these moments, these present moments with you, together. And so be in that space with them, for you and for your family. And I know that this doesn't cover all the things about financial toxicity or even preparing for the holidays. However, it's at least a start to be able to recognize that you're not alone in that all the things that you feel, the stress, the anxiety, the burden, the anger at treatment, all of those things, that you're not alone in that, that maybe you have a name for it and can know that this is how you can maybe navigate it a little bit. So that concludes the presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions or any comments. And if any has great ideas about how we as a community can navigate the holidays during these difficult times, please share them in the chat so that we can have a community of learning and support together, even in this space.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for sharing with us. We are going to move on to questions, and I'll start reading the chat if we get some really good suggestions on how to navigate the holidays. Yeah. So we did get a lot of great questions during this presentation. So just letting you know that you're just such a great great at your presentation, and that people were really sparked at the different questions that you had. So one of the first ones that came up is, can costs like parking, transportation, supplements, other things, can those be used in taxes?
Like in terms of like are you like sorry, my mind, like return tax, your return tax? Yes. Yeah.
Tax deductions.
Yeah, tax deductions. Yeah. Now I'm no guru on that. So okay. You have to find your people who you talk to for your taxes, but yes, they can. So that's a really great question.
Yeah, and I think Triage Cancer has some stuff like that as well, they do. Which you suggested in those resources. So if you have specific questions, definitely go to Triage Cancer and maybe ask through them as well. But also, like you said, always go to a tax professional for questions like that. Yeah. I do think that one was really inspired by all the hidden costs, which are such an eye-opener. Like parking isn't covered by insurance, but it's definitely a cost that you associate with going to the doctor. So I guess one of the things I wanted to ask is, how do we avoid like a negative mindset or like a down in morale when you have to pay that $13 before you go into your session or into your doctor's appointment?
Yeah. That's a great question. And it is, when I'm seeing patients that they have to have, do that, and the whole burden is it does impact their experience. And so the thing is that being able to again, I'm going back to that kind of dichotomous thinking, right? Like for some people it's kind of having that mindset shift of, okay, I know that I kind of have to do this. But the other thing is saying, talking to the social worker and see if we can find support and help in other ways. Parking is a hard one. But for example, there are organizations that, for example, the copay assistance, where they'll help with costs such as parking and treatment, but they'll give it directly to you, right? So then you can use it in one place, but then you can use that little fund for parking, and you know that it's kind of there. I also have where sometimes patients, they get dropped off outside of the little gate, because it's like, okay, it's like, they refuse to pay
Yeah.
that, and so I know that, I probably didn't give the best answer because it's hard. That's a hard thing to try to like to get out of, but because you're paying this, you have to go sit there, which is also costing you. But it could be just a mindset changer.
It sounds like it's also one of those things that you said, think of that best friend that is going to be nagging and like try to help
Mm-hmm.
you find solutions like that. And I immediately had a couple people in my head pop up that I was like, yes, I know that they would do
Mm-hmm.
this for me because it's
Yeah,
annoying trying to figure out how am I going to pay
it
for
is.
parking. So
Yeah,
that was such a
too many
good
things.
little nugget in your
Mhm.
presentation.
Yeah. Mhm.
So we did have another question. If you have any suggestions at all about how we should be organizing all of our paperwork for budget and finances, I know it's going to be a little
Mhm.
bit different for everyone, but maybe just like a pushing off point or a starting point that they could go to.
Mhm. Yeah. So, one is finding a system that works for you. But I like to do, I don't have it here with me, but in Target, they have the cutest little things. But getting your kind of like the little file, like portable kind of file. Yeah, see, I'm horrible at describing it, but I think most people can visualize what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
But starting to organize it that way, color coding, like if you have, okay, this is medical costs, this is main, housing costs. And so start to kind of color code, start to divide up the cost that you're doing and start to plan, and then writing out, separating it. I believe 100% in compartmentalization because too much in your mind is too overwhelming. So write down, what are our food costs? What are our housing costs? What are my treatment costs? What are just how self-care that we still got to live our life costs, and then saying what those are and then dividing them that way all together is too much, it's overwhelming, and so I always say to file according to that, the type of cost. And then again, if you look at the guidebook that we put out that we'll
Mhm.
share from Family Reach, is that they also kind of divide it like that. And
Yeah.
so then it's a great way to start. And so if you're unsure of how to start organizing, I highly recommend using their guidebook because they've already done some of the work for you, and then
Yeah.
you can kind of tweak it for yourself.
Perfect. Yeah. And that guidebook, the link to that will also be in an email that we send out after this as well. So that is such a good starting off point. And then getting one of those folders, I think they're like accordion folders that you open
Mm-hmm.
is a good place to start as well. And I love some good color coding.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we'll just have a couple more questions. One of them is how do you encourage patients and caregivers to ask for help? So the story that you had about the
Mm-hmm.
mother who is bur feels like she's burdening her husband with the 6-year-old and everything that he has to do. How would you encourage someone like that to ask for help or reach out for help?
Mm-hmm. So for me, a lot of those are captured through, as I mentioned, sometimes those distress screenings, or when I'm seeing that thermometer go up a little bit. And so for some people, they'll put like, have someone contact me. And so that is also a way to start to encourage, is that if you yourself kind of are saying, I don't know the words, I don't know how to ask for help, but then meeting with, whether it's the social worker, who can we can talk around that. We can talk about talking points of how do you do that, or where does help come from. For a lot of times I'm having to show the strength in asking for help, that you asking for help doesn't mean that somehow you're weaker or less than what you used to be, but it takes a lot to ask and say, hey, I can't do it, I can't carry this on my own, I need a little bit of help. And so a lot of times it's that building up is sometimes where we have to start. But also, if you don't have a social worker, or if you would like to, like, if it's your family, if there's someone that that you can talk to. Sometimes it's hard to talk to your spouse, right? I have some husbands who have always been the provider, and they don't really want to have that conversation of how do I ask my wife or my kids for help. And so is it a friend? I have another patient, he asked a friend, a guy friend, and like, hey, this is where I'm at. And this guy friend comes with him to all his appointments and just like manages and organizes everything. And so sometimes it's you finding where you feel most comfortable getting the help and asking for the help and then letting them do the work, as I mentioned. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then I just have one more question. I know we're a little over on time, but it was just such a good question. And it was, how do you find your financial counselor? And I know you could probably go to your social worker and ask them, but when it comes to like the hospital or places like that, how do you look that
Yeah.
up?
Yes, so usually the hospital will find it on their website. If you're physically, when you're looking at on the website, you would be able to find like if it says billing or things like that, usually you'll be able to find, or patient services sometimes. When I was at Texas Children's Hospital, that would fall under there. And you can see the financial counselor. Also, if you're physically, say, in a hospital, I would go to the information services and say that I would like to see a financial counselor. Again, in the hospital, I'm just speaking to Texas Children's. When I was in the cancer center, there was even a financial counselor within that clinic. So
Okay.
you can ask the clinic if there's a financial counselor. For example, at Texas Children or at Texas Oncology, we have they're called patient benefit representatives, and so those are the people that you would talk to if by chance you're getting your care at any of our clinics.
Cool. Thank you so much for that. And thank
Yeah.
you for participating with us today,
Yeah.
everyone who was here with us today. This is just a reminder that this session was recorded and will be sent to all registrants in follow-up email. And it will
Mhm.
also be available on our Texas Oncology Foundation website. So you're going to go to texasoncologyfoundation.org, and then you're going to go to education, which is Survive and Thrive webinar series. And then you're going to go ahead and see that we have upcoming webinars as well as our resource archive that you'll be able to find these resources. Just because we're here, let's see what our next webinar is. It's going to be Survive and Thrive webinar. Everybody has a story with Stephanie Broussard, and she's going to be enlightening us on a discussion of the emotional and psychological aspects of the cancer journey and the effects on your body. And let me see one more thing. Oh, we also would like you to like our Facebook page. This helps us stay current with our foundation and all the programs that we're having there. We also have an Instagram as well. So make sure that you follow us at Texas Oncology Foundation. We do have a couple other programs coming up. We have mentors and meetups in Austin every Friday in October. And this just allows people who have been to Survive and Thrive symposiums, virtual experiences, and webinars like this one to develop a deeper community connection. So this is a great group for you to join. It's a virtual and in-person group this month. And it's just kind of like social gatherings. And we also have a private group online that gets exclusive offerings and like sneak peeks to our upcoming programs. And then lastly, we value your feedback from you, our community. And in our follow-up email, there will be a link to a survey. So please, please, please take a moment to provide us your thoughts on today's presentation and share with us topics that you would like to hear about in the future. So that is it for today's webinar, everybody. Thank you so much for everyone who showed up today. And Ashley, thank you so much for being here with us. We appreciate you. Bye, everybody.